Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Bound by Banking. Joined here today with Gretchen Renaud. How are you doing today, Gretchen?
Good, Ryan. How are you?
Doing very well, doing very well. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Before we hop in, I'd love to just kind of give you a minute or two to introduce yourself, who you are, and what it is you do today.
Sure, absolutely. So my name is Gretchen Renaud, like you mentioned. I am the VP of Customer Success and Strategic Partnerships for PrintMail. I've been with PrintMail for just about 20 years. And most of that time, I actually managed our operations, both the print and mail operations as well as the business operations, which gave me a great foundation for understanding exactly what we do and why we do it and how it all works. And then about 3 or 4 years ago, I transitioned into managing strategic partnerships with a lot of third-party vendors that we work with, core providers, for example, as well as customer success. So I'm responsible for the strategic interaction with our customers, holding business reviews with them, working with them on contract renewals and new products and services, product development, et cetera. So that's my role.
Awesome. Sounds like you do a lot there. Wear many hats.
This is true.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. Well, awesome. Well, thank you again for being here. So if you're ready, Gretchen, we can go ahead and hop right into it. Got some questions ready for you and love to hear your thoughts and insight on them.
Sure.
Cool. All right.
Great.
So first question I have here for you is what do you feel like the biggest digital banking opportunities that banks are just simply leaving on the table?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So, Ryan, PrintMail works with about 200 plus community banks across the country. We serve mostly highly regulated industries, but our primary vertical is community banks. We work with a handful of credit unions and other FIs in general, but most of our experience is across banks. So we have seen this quite a bit, and it comes up in the conversations that I have with our customers almost daily. And the thing that I think a lot of banks are leaving on the table when it comes to the digital experience for their customers is they're not presenting all of the documents to their customers electronically.
Hmm.
You'd be surprised how many banks only make their, I'm going to say some industry jargon, but their DDA or their demand deposit account, your checking account, they only make the checking statement available electronically. You go into online banking and you want to see your statements, that's really all that's going to be there. You're not going to see loan documents for a loan you might have with the bank. You're not going to see a mortgage document. You may not see other notices that they're sending you. And sometimes, even more importantly, you're not going to see your tax documents. They only come on paper. So this is something that, of course, PrintMail does as well. We provide those services for banks. We're printing and mailing their critical documents and presenting them electronically to their customers through an online banking integration. But many, many community banks are really not presenting them all electronically. That comes from a lot of different areas and a lot of different reasons. There can be limitations with their core provider. There can be limitations with their imaging provider. It could be a business decision. It could be a legacy business decision from 10 or 15 years ago that no one has revisited recently. But at the end of the day, it really creates an inconsistent experience for the bank's customers. You're thinking, I get this, this one in the mail, this one online. I have a question about this one, but I lost it. I can't actually go get it online. I recently had an experience with that myself personally. Even in the industry, I was frustrated by it. I had opened a HELOC, a home equity line of credit with a bank. And I had closed on the loan, and I had gotten a document then in the mail a day or two later that said there was still some additional information they needed. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. We already closed on the loan. I wonder if they actually need this information. So I called the loan officer, and they had no idea. They had no access to that document that was sent to me. They didn't know when it was sent, what it said. And so it just became kind of a lengthy back and forth to even just understand, nope, actually nothing was needed. So, I'm sure banks want their customers to have that consistent experience with digital all around. And sometimes that can start with something as simple as making sure all the documents are available. And on top of that, not only does it, create that customer experience that's really consistent for the end user, there's a pretty major cost savings for the banks too, when it comes to making all those documents available digitally. I'm sure if you've mailed anything recently, postage is very expensive.
Yep.
We're pushing up against 70 cents a piece for postage right now. So with a lot of our customers, I find huge ROI opportunity if they're able to move those documents to electronic and just not pay the postage, let alone the cost of actually printing and mailing. It's pretty significant.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, not only are you saving, all the money on postage and stamps and everything, but the end user who's looking for these documents, if it's electronically, can theoretically get it at an instant. Like they're
Yeah,
not having to call up and utilize and tie up resources or anything like that. Like they can just log into an app or on the website or something and download it as a PDF or secure file or something like that.
absolutely. And as we get into, younger generations, the
Yes, yes.
expectation of self-service on all of these things is very high.
Yeah. I hadn't even thought about it, but yeah, I mean, younger generations, they're not going to pick up the phone and call the bank. They're just going to download it on their app or some.
Right. Yeah, and if it's not there,
Yeah, they're going to have some issues with that. So I get it. I'm a millennial, and I even still sometimes I'm like, I don't want to talk to somebody. I just want to download it.
right,
So
exactly.
very cool.
Definitely an area for opportunity.
Awesome. Love that answer. So, all right. So, next question here for you. So, obviously, banks navigate a lot of major changes. What do you feel like separates the ones who are able to do that successful and the ones who struggle?
Okay. So major changes, when I think of major changes at banks, you're talking about sometimes M&A activity, mergers
Mm-hmm.
and acquisitions. You're talking about maybe vendor changes, software changes. The one that comes to mind for me, probably top of mind, is core conversions, though.
Yep.
We're working with a number of banks across, call it the big three: FIS, Fiserv, Jack Henry. The sheer number of core conversions that we navigate over, the year, for example, is probably higher than any individual banker has ever navigated across their entire career. So, when I think of successful major change at a bank, that's what comes to mind, and some of the
Yeah.
lessons learned, through helping customers in banks specifically navigate through those core conversions. And I think one of the key things, and it might be obvious, is communication. You're thinking about the software, you're thinking about the project, you're thinking about the impact, but the communication piece of it,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
especially with your vendors that are going to be involved, everything from statement vendors like PrintMail all the way to, your marketing vendors like BankBound, every element of that needs to be communicated as early as possible and, as clear as possible, and involving your vendors, even ones you may not think it has a direct impact to, as early as possible, I think is really critical too. They can really act as a partner if you
Mm-hmm.
have that relationship with them, and not just a vendor. A lot of people think of some of the things we do as just a compliance vendor, check a box, move on, but they can really be consultants for you because, for example, we navigate these on almost a weekly basis. We're working through a core conversion with a bank. So we can help with, hey, all the gotchas that you might not have thought of from our experience. And so I'm sure many vendors that are in the ecosystem for the bank can help in the same way. Even on the marketing side, the communication that you
Yeah.
make to customers about what's changing and when. Sometimes that piece of it gets left till the end, and you don't always think about that, or you think about it really close to the go live or the actual conversion date. And the experience that your customer is going to have is going to be different. So what does that look like? And what digital channels are you taking advantage of to communicate those changes to your customer and get ahead of it and build excitement around the things that are going to be better or different for them? So I think that one's really there. What you have to do there is just communicate well and really ultimately make sure that all your vendors are really partners, not just vendors.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think the communication part there, I think you nailed it on the head. We worked with somebody about a year ago or so who went through a core conversion as well, and we were this new core provider really opened up the door for a lot of things that we were able to partner with and kind of be that advisor. And so
Mhm.
when we were talking about it, we're like, hey, there's a lot more things we can assist now that we're not limited to anymore. And so it really opened up our partnership, and we've been able to grow a lot more the past year. And so having that communication, like you said, letting your partners and your vendors know, like, hey, this is what we're thinking. Obviously, it's not our decision, but at least keep us in the loop is kind of, I think, a reasonable ask. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
no, that's a good point because I think there are a lot of other things that when you make that core conversion, you don't think about until you start talking with people. They're able to bring new ideas and new thoughts and new questions and things like that. And so I think if you can cover as many of those as you can, that's additional resources. And okay, now you're able to make a sound, comfortable decision.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure.
Cool. Awesome. Okay, so obviously, Gretchen, you have worked with quite a bit of different banks over the years, about 200 plus, if I'm not mistaken. So, what are some things that you've learned from with working all these different banks?
Yeah, it's a great question. We currently serve about 200 customers, but we probably have worked with well over 500 or 600 over the course of the business back and forth. Sometimes things change, and like we mentioned, M&A
Yep.
activity.
Yep.
So yeah, we feel like we've probably seen it all. Probably the thing that comes to mind there for me would be, I think a lot of banks think that their challenges, as we all do, are unique, and they're probably fairly common in the sense of it's very likely that another FI, bank, credit union, et cetera, has had the same challenge you've had. They've navigated it, and they've probably worked with a vendor, like BankBound, like PrintMail, to help solve that challenge. And so one of the things I always ask our customers about is what are they doing to build peer relationships? A lot of banks are going to participate in things like user groups, different conferences, networking opportunities. What I find across our customer base is they tend to be, those are great. You should absolutely do them, but those tend to be across the vertical of your core. So if you're a Jack Henry Bank, for example, you're going to Jack Henry user groups, you're going to the Jack
Hmm.
Henry National Conference,
Yep.
you're interacting with other Jack Henry banks, and that's great and that's valuable and you need that. But I think it's also interesting to branch out into other peer relationships because sometimes there's things that can go, kind of be a cross problem that aren't really related to core. And sometimes I think working with your vendors, again, like BankBound or PrintMail, can be a really interesting way to connect yourself as a banker with other peers that you might not be able to otherwise. I have kind of encouraged our customers when I meet with them for business reviews, for example, to say, if you have a challenge, tell us about it. We've likely heard it before. We could probably make a connection with a fellow bank that's had the same issue or challenge, and they might have some creative advice that you have not thought of. One thing that comes to mind for me there right away recently is, we do print mail obviously a lot. So we're interacting with the United States Postal Service and mail and, creating statements and documents for customers. And one of the biggest problems that a lot of banks face, especially on the operations side, is the sheer amount of return mail that they get.
Yeah.
That are not deliverable for all the reasons they're not deliverable. Well, we have a couple of tools that can help with that, and we're always encouraging banks to think about that. One of those tools is something called secure destruction. And this is where when the post office identifies the piece as a return, instead of it going back to the bank with the yellow sticker on it, the post office securely destroys that piece, and then you get a digital
Ah.
record of it. It's a great service. It's actually the direction the post office is going for the future. They have said that eventually return mail is going to be eliminated physically and it'll all be digital. Probably won't happen quickly.
Yeah.
But a lot of banks that we talk to love the concept of that, but they're struggling to get it past compliance. There's risk. That
Yeah.
sounds risky of the post office doing the destroying. What does that look like? What kind of records do we get? Well, we've had a number of banks that have been able to sort of get good information from us as their vendor partner, we get them good information from the post office. They've navigated it very successfully with their compliance departments, been able to implement it and achieve all that savings. So now every time one of my customers says, hey, I love that, but compliance, I can
Yeah.
say, hey, I have somebody you can talk to.
Yep.
At least pick their brain about how they navigated that with compliance. So it can be a really helpful thing. And you may not always think about that, but if your bank bound customers are asking you questions like that, you probably have 10 or 15 other customers that have had the same
Yep.
challenge.
Yep.
So you're in a unique position to be able to make those introductions. And I love to be able to do that. So
Yeah.
that's one area where I think we've learned a lot about how important that kind of peer communication and networking is.
Yeah. And I 100% agree with that. If making sure that you're not having the same group of friends for everybody, meeting these people at different conferences or different trade shows or things like that, okay, they may have a different core provider, they may have a different online account opening platform, or they may have a different website builder or something like that. Like, chances are there may be some things that overlap, but there's also going to be plenty of things that don't overlap that, okay, you can pick the brain, like what you were talking about, like with this mail destruction thing. Like, if you're in like just a Jack Henry peer group or something like that, you may have never found out about that. You may not even know about it. And so having that spread out kind of group of friends and peers and stuff, absolutely.
Yeah, another thing that kind of, in that same vein, we talk about technology and the core software obviously becomes a very
Hmm.
big station, and that's where you tend to align. But from working with the number of banks that we have over the years, I have found that technology is less important than what I already said is communication,
Hmm.
and the focus on your customers. Like, what is their ultimate experience? We used to have a sales individual at our organization many years ago who had opened a number, probably 20, 30 different accounts across all different banks, just in order to be a customer of the bank. to see what the experience actually looked like. And
Interesting.
very valuable. So having that focus on what is your customer experience really like? And then it might seem obvious too, but the culture at the bank, we have seen working with so many, there's some very distinct differences in culture. You can tell when a bank has a culture of open, collaborative, they care about each other versus, there's some banks that it's very apparent they have a culture of just win and, at all costs, and it's
Yeah.
all about money or it's all about, profit. And it can become apparent, how you treat your vendors, how you interact with your vendors, that's gonna proliferate through how you treat your customers too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
focusing on the culture you want in your institution is a big one too.
Love it. Well said. Well said. So, all right, Gretchen, I got the last question here for you. Ready?
I'm ready.
All right. So, obviously, everybody wants a really strong bank vendor relationship. What do you find that a lot of these that have that strong relationship, what do they have in common? What are those things that you're seeing?
Hmm. Yeah, there's a couple for sure. One I would say right off the top of my head is you really need to focus on, let's call it executive level communication. So you're going to talk to your vendor probably on a tactical basis all the time. You're
Hmm.
going to, have quick phone calls, you're going to have check-ins, you're going to, have tickets you're putting in, you're going to have quick requests, emails, all those tactical day-to-day interactions that you have with your vendor, whoever it is. Make sure you're focusing and actually having strategic conversations with your vendors too. It's
Mm,
hard to do sometimes. It's hard to set aside the time. For us, that looks like at PrintMail, we call it an executive business review, where we're asking for probably C-level, buy-in and participation, where we're going to really understand what's happening at the bank for the next 6 to 12 months. What's high level for you that we should be aware of? Sometimes it's things where we may not necessarily need to do anything today, but maybe we need to put time on our project timeline for you. I had a bank tell me probably almost 2 years ago that they were evaluating a new vendor for online banking. And that's great. We'd much rather know that 2 years in advance, even though they weren't going to make the decision right away, because we did slot time on our project roadmap for that change whenever it happened.
yeah.
And then sometimes the things that they'll share with us about what, or you're going to share with your vendor about what's coming for you is also going to be something where maybe it's not something they do today, but I know at PrintMail, and you could speak to Bankbound, but on the PrintMail side, we have a product roadmap that we're always building out. What new products and services are we developing that are going to help common challenges across our customers? So if we're hearing the same things repeatedly, chances are we're going to look at building a product or a service to try to help with
Yeah.
that. So have that executive level, take the time, even if it's twice a year, take the
Yeah.
time to make sure you actually have kind of C-suite executives talking to the vendors and being willing to share. And I think, that piece we said earlier about really looking at your vendors as strategic partners and not just vendors, that's kind of how you get there. That's how
Yeah.
you build that relationship, because you've told them what your priorities are, what's important to you. You've told them what's not working, what the challenges are. And then I think the other thing that can bring to the table that sometimes is missed in these vendor relationships too, if you really want to be a partner, is honestly, things are going to happen. Things are going to go wrong.
Hmm.
Nothing's
Hmm.
perfect. When problems occur and you can be transparent from both sides, it creates a totally different environment. It's an environment of trust and kind of mutual respect, instead of just this, my vendor screwed up, or
Yeah.
this situation happened. And then you can really navigate it together mutually to a positive resolution. It makes a big difference. Nobody's perfect, obviously, things happen.
Hmm.
So, communicating early, giving them that information, having that place of trust, and then, sharing those, future plans that are exciting, can really help your vendor really be a partner.
Yeah. Yeah. And I believe that any great partnership is built upon relationship and results. Obviously, results have to be there. Otherwise, we're not going to pay you to be friends. But that
Right.
relationship piece is just as important, like you were talking about. Okay, not everything is going to be perfect. Things happen sometimes. There's mistakes, and it may not be malicious. It could just be an innocent mistake, but okay, things are going to happen. They're going to pop up time to time. Having that strong relationship, if you're mad at your spouse or something, you're not just going to go, "Oh, I'm done. I'm divorcing you." Like, no, you work through the problem together. I
Right.
feel like it's kind of that same thing with that partnership with the vendor and the bank and whatnot. Like, okay, problems arise. Let's work through it together and let's come up with a solution and move forward. So,
Yeah. And in order to have that trust, like you said, like you would with your spouse, you need to have a relationship.
yeah, Yeah.
And that key to what are the same keys to any relationship, communication and
Yep.
respect and trust and, all those things. So, don't neglect your vendors. That's the other thing
Yeah.
I would say too. We have a handful of customers, I'm sure everyone does, where, they're just not interested in really
Mhm.
interacting. And it's, you want that for so many reasons, but, primarily we want to be able to be a help to them. And if we're not able to have those conversations, we don't know how we can be a help. So yeah, make the time. It's well worth it. And your vendors can usually, especially if you ask them for it. One of the things I volunteer in our business reviews with customers is peer benchmarking data. But if your vendor isn't offering you that, ask for it. Say, hey, you're working with other banks across print and mail and electronic presentment of documents on the bank bound side, all the marketing things. What are other banks seeing? What are other banks doing? How do we rate according to, compared to our peers?
Yeah.
Um, your vendor has a treasure trove of information that you don't have as a bank,
Yes.
across all your
Yes.
peers. So ask them for it. They're probably going to likely give it to you.
Yeah. No, that's you never know until you ask. Don't
Right.
be afraid. So
Yeah.
very cool. All right, Gretchen. Well, hey, I really appreciate you hopping on today. Wonderful talking with you. Thank you for all the insights and the answers and everything like that. So really enjoyed listening to you today. And again, I can't thank you enough for joining.
Sure. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.